Welcome into Courtside Seats with Kroeger,
a Charlotte Hornets podcast.
Here he is, Chris Kroeger.
All right, here we are. It's another episode of Courtside Seats, our Charlotte Hornets podcast. And, as we churn on, we've got 16 games left to go in the season. And so we figured, let's talk a little NBA and let's talk a little Hornets. And this guy's got an amazing piece that is super interesting, and I haven't seen anybody writing about stuff like this. And it's up now with the Washington Post. NBA writer, NBA insider, Michael Pina making time for us on Courtside Seats. Michael, what's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, we were talking before we got started. It's my rookie season, calling games and being around a team every single day. And I don't know where the season went. You've been doing this for a while. Like, does it amaze you still to this day? Like how quickly an 82-game schedule blows by, and maybe even quicker now with the way the league is covered. But it's amazing how we're almost at the end of the season already.
It's wild. I mean, you get to this point, and I can see it from kind of both points of view, where it goes by extremely fast if you think about opening night and where you were and kind of the storylines and the expectations heading into the season and how everything is mutated and changed. But then also, after All-Star break specifically, it's kind of like, okay, why aren't the playoffs here right now? I think I want the season to be even shorter than it is in terms of the games that are actually played and the length of the regular season. But yeah, it goes by extremely fast.
Well, and I think the one thing you got to give, I think, Adam Silver in the league a lot of credit, because we were just talking. I came back from Houston, whatever that was, hours ago now at this point while we're taping the podcast. And you were saying, how's everything going? How's the season going? I'm saying, I'm getting better. I think at like learning how to rest and when to rest and how to manage like my body clock. And I'm not playing games. Like I say this all the time. It amazes me. I know people talk about NBA players and they stay in the nicest hotels and they fly charter and everything's laid out in front of them. That's all well and true. Like nobody's saying those things aren't true. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everything's just easy and it's natural for your body to play on back-to-backs or 3 games in 4 days or whatever it might be. And it just amazes me how hard that grind is now that I'm around it all the time. And it's easier now than it's ever been before. But I think you got to credit Adam Silver and the NBA for listening to guys like LeBron a few years ago and players saying, hey, we got to do something about this schedule. We got to build in more rest. We got to find a way to take more time off at the All-Star break, which are all things that happen now. But I think the consequence on the other side, which is a good thing, is, essentially it's a sprint towards the end of the season after the All-Star break. And I think what it creates almost is like a mini tournament. Like right now it feels, especially like for the teams at the bottom of the East like we're at right now, it feels like the playoffs have already begun to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's exactly. Every game really matters if you're fighting for a playoff spot for sure. And as I said before we started this, in terms of the rest and just exhaustion of being on the road, when I covered the finals last year, it was my first time doing so, and it was only a 4-game series. But just flying from, from New York to Oakland and then to Cleveland, I was exhausted, and I have no idea how these guys, forget about like a long, lengthy road trip and, as you said, 3 games in 4 nights or whatever. Even just that series, I was just physically exhausted. And I'm not even doing anything active. I'm walking to the arena. Yeah, exactly. I'm opening my laptop. I'm typing away. It is, and I was drained. I was drinking 6 cups of coffee a day. So I have no idea how players do what they do, let alone even the beat writers who are on the grind, on the road all season long. So it's pretty remarkable.
Well, let's talk about what you think of the season so far. I think we can all agree that the Lakers have been such a major storyline. Where did you fall, by the way, preseason? Did you think it was going to be, hey, this is going to be really hard, let's not just pencil LeBron into the playoffs? Or were you in the camp that thought, no, it's LeBron, I know it's the West, but he'll find a way to, get to 44, 46 wins and sneak this team into the bottom of the West? How did you feel going into the season about how that was going to play out?
Yeah, it's funny. Even going into the season, coming off the postseason that LeBron had last year, which was one of the most miraculous things I've ever seen, just the body of work that he compiled on that stretch to bring Cleveland to the finals. I did not have the Lakers in as a lock to make the playoffs, and that's mostly because of just the roster that was compiled around him. And, the veterans that they brought in did not make a lot of sense to me at all. You had Rondo, Michael Beasley, Lance Stevenson, even JaVale McGee. These one-year deals just did not make logical sense. And then you had a lot of talented youth, but guys who have never played in meaningful NBA games before. All of a sudden, the pressure and the spotlight was going to be on them to a degree that they've never experienced before. So, LeBron is the best player that I've ever seen. And I'm 31 years old, so I was not alive to watch Jordan in his prime. But even that said, I did not have them as a lock. I'm still a little surprised that they are in the position that they're in.
Well, and it's one injury, right? Like, maybe this isn't fair, but, I think everybody's now pointing back to the injury LeBron suffered on Christmas Day against the Warriors. And, that derailed the season. I mean, maybe, but, I don't know. It's like I look at all the injuries Denver's dealt with and look at where they're at right now it's entirely possible they're the 1 seed going into the Western Conference playoffs. I mean, I know it's LeBron, but Denver's had a litany of injuries all year long, and they found ways to overcome it. But it's just wild, the margin for error for LA. And I've seen Milwaukee now up close and personal 4 times. They're the real deal. And it amazes me every time I see him that somehow Brook Lopez was just allowed to walk like it was nothing. I don't understand how Brook Lopez wasn't thought to be a guy that could be of major help to LeBron and the Lakers right now.
Oh, he would have been transformative for their entire season, I think. Specifically if you used him as the Bucks have, which is just, unleashing this 7-foot 3-point bombs away spacer, and a guy who, by the way, has been an incredible rim protector this season Milwaukee's defensive scheme. That's huge. Those are 2 critical things that the Lakers did not have. I mean, they had JaVale McGee at the beginning of the year, and then, they needed to sign Tyson Chandler because JaVale McGee's never played starters minutes in his entire career. So they didn't have a backup 5. They were playing Kyle Kuzma at the position before they had to go scramble and get to claim Tyson Chandler. Brook Lopez just would have been a perfect fit for them, and I don't think they would be in the position that they're in now had they re-signed him in the offseason.
Who's been the biggest surprise outside of I guess maybe underperforming, but maybe in terms of overperforming? Brooklyn's been really great in the East with all the injuries that they've battled with. Detroit all of a sudden now is somehow the hottest team in the NBA with the Houston Rockets. Who saw that going into the All-Star break? But maybe on the whole of the year, who's surprised you the most so far? Yeah,
Brooklyn is a really good choice there. I mean, I live in Brooklyn. I've been to a ton of their games this season. Just the way, Spencer Dinwiddie's season has been incredible. D'Angelo Russell making the All-Star team is one of the most surprising things. I mean, nobody saw that coming into the season at all. The year that Joe Harris has had, just some other guys in that team, Karis LeVert before he went down. The fact that they sustained their success after Karis suffered that injury is just remarkable and speaks to their depth and their culture and just their coaching and their preparation. I think a team that, even though they've kind of fallen out of it a little bit here late, I think the Sacramento Kings have probably been the biggest surprise to me this season. I mean, I expected them to be kind of where Phoenix has been this year. I expected them to really struggle, and they have not at all. I mean, Buddy Hield and De'Aaron Fox are, looking like one of the better backcourts of the future in the entire league. Marvin Bagley looks pretty good. He's hurt now, but he's looked pretty good of late. And just, the style of play that they've embraced where they just get up and go as one of the fastest teams in the league. And they've kind of embraced that mentality, and they look great, and the future's bright there as well.
I got to give credit too, and I know this is coming on late. I've seen a lot of people talking about this in the last couple of weeks because they've all of a sudden just been red hot. They've won 5 in a row while we're taping this. But the Clippers, Doc is. I just think somehow we've forgotten how good of a coach Doc is. Like because of the Brad Stevens of the world and what Steve Kerr's done, and Mike Malone in Denver, and Mike D'Antoni, what he's done with Houston, Mike Budenholzer in Milwaukee. It's like somehow Doc just steady Eddie. We've seemed to have forgotten just how much of an elite coach he is and what he's doing with guys that are really good, but they keep turning the roster over every year at the trade deadline, and yet here they are going to be a playoff team again. That's almost a lock now, which is crazy to say. But man, the Clippers have been such a revelation. And you know what's wild about it to me, Michael, is I look at the Clippers and they've been trying to do this forever, but Doc, I think, has really helped materialize this. They're the anti-Lakers. They've really carved out a lane in LA where their whole identity, their culture, the way they play, it's just grit, determination. It's not about star power. It's just we're the anti-Lakers in LA, and they're the more respectable team right now.
No, I mean, I could not agree with you more. I mean, just up and down the roster, just the type of players that they have. This was always going to be a bridge season for that organization where you didn't know in what direction they would go, if they would compete hard every single night, because, everybody's looking towards this summer when, they have 2 max slots and they have Kawhi Leonard and all these other stars that are available that they're trying to sign. But I mean, just even after they trade away their best player, arguably, in Tobias Harris, they've been as competitive, as feisty as any team in basketball. And, if I had to vote for Coach of the Year today, it would go to Bud in Milwaukee for just how he's transformed that team, on both ends. But I mean, Doc Rivers definitely deserves votes for Coach of the Year for sure.
Well, we had drama last night. This would have been on, I guess, Monday night, while the night before we're taping our podcast. First of all, we had a fight break out. That was a legitimate fight, by the way, right? Ibaka and Marcus Chris, that was a legitimate fight. Agree or disagree?
Oh, punches were thrown. A throat was grabbed.
Yeah.
You don't see that every day in the NBA.
So what's going to come of that, by the way? That's not just we'll give him a game or two. This seems, especially for Ibaka, who's got a little bit of a history, this seems like this could, I don't know if it's going to derail the Raptors because they got some breathing room ahead of Philadelphia, but Ibaka's going to be out for a little while, it seems. Yeah,
I would guess, 4 games at minimum. As you said, he has a history of throwing punches, and that's not a great thing. Particularly with this case where, it's not like anyone instigated anything physical with him. He just got up and kind of sucker punched grabbed Marcus Chris from behind. So that, granted, with this history, but it'll be really interesting to see how Toronto adjusts with, they have Marc Gasol now and they can just kind of start him and just see how that flows into the next few weeks and how they can because it's really difficult as is with, their ability to develop chemistry and to develop what they want to be their postseason rotation. So this is not a well-timed suspension on the horizon for Serge Ibaka and the Raptors.
And then obviously it was a very dramatic, heated scene that really, I don't know, I think it probably epitomizes how our league is consumed anymore. It seemed to more play out on social media than anywhere else, with Russell Westbrook and a fan last night with the Jazz, and it's a major bout of he said, where he said that Russell Westbrook saying that he said some really charged things to me that nobody should be allowed to say, entirely disrespectful. The other guy is saying that the fan is saying that Westbrook was provoked for no good reason. I didn't say anything. I wasn't cursing. He was lobbing threats at my wife. So crazy scene last night in Utah, and I don't think we're any closer today to knowing what happened there. But either way, it's not a good look for either party, and it's not to excuse anybody's behavior. But maybe this is a really simple answer. Our fans are great. They're what make our sport. But in my opinion, you can't just, and we've got rules. The NBA, when you come and you sit courtside, you've got a sheet at your seat that says, here are the rules. You can't say X, Y, and Z. You can't behave this way. You can't do these things. And if you do, you're subject to ejection. Now, clearly that fan didn't appear to be approached by security for threatening any of those things. But, if you're a fan, just by buying a ticket, it doesn't allow you access to come into an arena and say whatever you want to a player just because you thought it gives you that right. And same thing on the player side. You got to find a way somehow. I know it's not easy to maintain your composure, but that was not a pretty scene last night.
No, it wasn't. And, as you said, we don't know exactly what the fans said. We have Westbrook at the tail end of what appeared to be a confrontation, saying some things that just aren't great. And, he apologized for saying, or he at least clarified in his post-game comments the part about, the domestic violence comment, saying that he would beat up the fan and his wife, which is not great. But that said, I mean, fans do things that they can get away with saying whatever they want. There have been multiple cases this season. I mean, Westbrook was touched by a child or hit by a child recently who was sitting courtside expecting Westbrook not to respond. And that's the kind of mentality that fans who pay whatever you're paying for your seat, you can't, this isn't a zoo. I mean, these are human beings you are watching, and they will respond sometimes when wild things are being yelled in their direction at what is essentially their office. So, I think it was just a really ugly scene, and I don't really know what else to say about it. It was gross, and I hope the NBA can move on as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I think it's the crazy part of our game where, I think this is what makes the NBA so awesome to see in person is you see these players who in my mind are the best athletes in the world, and when you see them up close in a confined space and the way they're running up and down the floor, and when you're sitting courtside and you have access, there was an incident with Westbrook, a couple weeks ago with a young boy who touched him as he was bringing the ball. And even that seemed kind of harmless, but at the same time, it's like, no, there's got to be some level of boundary. And then last year, and this has happened with multiple players, but it happened with Westbrook too, where a fan really put a phone right in his face. And it's just like, I don't know. I think this is a larger societal thing. Just because social media and technology has really broken down the human barrier, and you can't just shove a phone in somebody's face because you bought a seat to a game like that. Somehow we just got to be smarter with the way we're interacting with one another out there.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. I think it was last season. Rodney Hood was walking off the floor, and a fan who was screaming at him the whole game, had his phone up in his face, and he just kind of slapped the phone out of the fan's hand, and he was fined for that. And I remember having a conversation with Rodney about it, and he understands what he did was wrong, but he's also like, this guy is screaming at me the whole game, things that are completely inappropriate, and the security isn't really doing anything about it. And, I was ejected for something else, and so I lost my cool. And, fans, there's no real punishment for, the worst that could happen really is, you get ejected from the game, whereas, players are held to a much higher standard, and, fines are extremely costly, suspensions are extremely costly. So it's just, there's a little bit of a double standard there that I think is unfair to the players. And again, I just hope the NBA can move on as quickly as possible from this.
All right, Michael, so you're freelancing a little bit, and you just wrote a amazing piece at the Washington Post, and it came out last week. And it's March Madness, so I guess it's fitting that you write about Providence Fire great God Shamgod, who, to be honest, and I'm an NBA junkie, obviously, I had no idea he was on an NBA payroll, on an NBA coaching staff, and it's in Dallas, and it's just fascinating, this lane that he's carved out. Where did this whole idea come from? Let's start there. How long have you been working on this story, and when did this kind of come on your radar?
Right. So I've been working on it, a few weeks. The idea basically is sprung from, the NBA teams have, a lot of them, not all, have shooting coaches, specialists who, work with players to correct their form and, up their shooting percentage from deep, with the importance of spacing and obviously the 3-point revolution that makes sense. So, I was wondering just why there weren't more specialists, and particularly with ball handling, because again, with the way the game is being played and where things are going, it's a much more positionless league now. And to be on the court, you really need to not only, even if you're a wing who can shoot threes, you really need to do more than, spot up in the corner. If someone passes you the ball, you absolutely have to be able to put it on the floor and either get to the rim, force a rotation, or make a play with it and hit the open man maybe on the weak side. So I was just curious why there weren't any, or if there were. So I kind of did a little digging, and there weren't really any. I talked around to some different player development coaches around the league, and no one is really no one is labeled a ball handling coach. And even when God Shamgod was hired, his primary and pretty much his sole duties were to work on the team's ball handling and everyone on the roster, going from, the centers down to the point guards, and watching film with them to figure out what is the best way that they can maximize ball handling in a game situation, because obviously you don't want to just have whoever, teaching a guy to dribble between his legs and behind his back. Like, that doesn't really impact winning. So it's really interesting, just the science behind how he teaches these guys ways to handle the ball in situations where it's just instinctual and they don't have to necessarily think through what they're doing, so that they're able to, read a defense or focus on something else than, I'm dribbling the ball right now. So that's just a really fascinating thing to me. And I think in the future, we might see more coaches like God Shamgod on staffs throughout the league, as the league gets more positionless and there's more space and there's more room for guys to operate.
Well, and I guess to that point, like, our league is still so based on athleticism and talent, but in your mind, the impact of skill, being a skilled player and skill work in general, like, what percentage of the pie has that become? Because I look at a guy like Luka, for example, who, I think Luka can grow his game, but I do think largely this is who Luka is. I think he can transform his body a little bit, but he's not going to become a much more explosive player by any stretch. He's just so highly skilled that I think that's why he's coming to the league so hot, so fast. So the notion of skill work, how big of a portion of that is today's NBA in terms of bridging the gap between talent and raw raw athleticism that some guys just simply don't have?
I mean, I think it's humongous. I think that your ability to stay on the floor, particularly in a playoff situation, is almost dependent now on, what you can do with the basketball and what skills you have. And again, like, I think maybe 5 years ago, 3-and-D was the prototypical role player. That's what you wanted. You wanted Danny Green. You wanted a guy who could D someone up and then just spot up in the corner. And, right now that player is almost antiquated already. Like, you need, like, we saw it last year a little bit in the playoffs with Kyle Korver in Cleveland, where, the Warriors, they're and the Celtics before that, their game plan was wrapped around, okay, we're just going to take away, we know he wants to shoot and he is not going to put the ball on the ground. So we're going to take away that shot. And once you take away the shot, Kyle Korver all of a sudden is completely neutralized. So what you need is players who can do a little bit more with the ball. And, I think that value is just increasing as the game continues to evolve. And Luka, he comes in extremely skilled, and it's really difficult for you to, or maybe it's impossible for you to, like, significantly improve yourself athletically. But he can always work on his skill. He can always get tighter ball handling. He can always, improve his footwork and work on that. So I think, with someone like Sham on the coaching staff in Dallas, I think that that's a huge benefit to Luka as he goes on and enjoys the rest of his career.
Well, and I guess to that point, like, I look at a guy like Trey Young, for example, right? And Trey, by the way, is making an incredible late push for Rookie of the Year. I don't know if he can get it, but you got to tip your cap for everybody that just kind of assumed it was going to be Luka by a long shot. But I look at Trey and I think, I'm not going to say Trey couldn't have played in the NBA 10, 15, 20 years ago, because I don't know. That seems to be too much of an extreme. But what would he have been in the NBA 10, 15, 20 years ago? But today's game is today's game. And the way he fits in with his ball handling and with his pull-up shooting, in transition off the dribble, and especially by spacing the floor, shooting those logo threes from 28 plus feet out. That's today's game. And now I look at a guy like Trey Young and I think, man, I can't wait to watch what his development's going to be in the NBA. It's crazy to think what he could do if he continues to work on his skill level.
Yeah, Trey Young is a fascinating case just because, teams are already so petrified of his pull-up three and the distance at which he's able to get it off. And he's another one where, as he continues to improve his handle, which is already terrific, he's already one of the league leaders in assists. I think I looked this up the other day. I'm pretty sure he leads the league in corner three assists, which is just remarkable given his size. And, you think of guys who assist on the corner three, guys who can throw those cross court skip passes and, James Harden, LeBron James, that type. You have to be big. But the way he just kind of slithers around and gets where he wants to go already and is able to hit guys in the corner, I think that's humongous. And so it'll be fascinating to see how he grows and how he evolves, as teams are trying to take away that pull-up three and try to force them into different things.
It's funny, when we were in Atlanta earlier this year, we were using not their practice facility, but we were using a different court in State Farm Arena, and the court was taped off. And I think I've told this story to a few people, but the court was taped off in a different way. And we're wrapping up practice, and Jay Triano, the head coach for the Canadian national team, one of our assistant coaches, came over to me and said, "Chris, what are these lines on the court?" And I said, "I don't know, coach." He said, "Well, you're smart. I'll give you a few minutes, figure it out." Well, he came back to me a few minutes later, and I couldn't figure it out. I could not put my hand and wrap my head around what they were doing. And they had taped the line that was parallel to the baseline, just inside the corner on the three-point line. And then there was another line that ran the arc of the three-point line that was parallel to that, just a few feet out. And he said, "Well, I'll tell you, when they practice, if you shoot in the corner, it's 3. And if you shoot above the break at that other line, it's 4. They're practicing a 4-point play." And he said they're spacing the floor. You can't space the floor to the boundary lines any further out, but you can space it closer to midcourt, right? And that's what Damian does and Steph does and Trey's trying to do with these logo threes, these 28-foot threes and further out, where now you've got to step out. If somebody is capable of hitting it, you've got to respect it. And now you've created more space out, which opens the driving lanes and the passing lanes and all that sort of stuff. But it's amazing to me now, these are the games that are being played, even in practice, where teams are trying to ingrain in players a specific type of shot to get and create on the court that's going to open up a defense out there. And those are just things that, to me, I don't think existed even just a few years ago in the NBA. But teams are now practicing in a specific way to value specific shots on the court, and it's wild.
Yeah, I mean, you see that there's a couple teams come to mind. The Sixers do that, I think, in their practice facility. The Bucks do that, have started doing that this year. And I think the Rockets are probably the most famous, I guess, for, just having guys spot up, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet behind the three-point line in game situations to really make it so James Harden, initially James Harden and now Chris Paul, have all this space to just attack in isolation. And, you guys played the Rockets last night, and you just watch when you watch Eric Gordon, for example, off the ball, he is never standing right at the arc. He is always 2, 3, 4, 5 feet behind it. And it makes it so difficult to defend that team because he can hit those shots. So you have to respect it. And at the same time, you have to be conscious of the fact that James Harden is about to go downhill on you and get to the free throw line or hit a floater or, whatever he's going to do. So it is really fascinating. And again, that kind of ties back into just the whole need for players who can handle the ball, because there's just so much more space to operate. Even though the court is not getting bigger, there is more space within it to operate on the offensive end.
My question is, and this is a big question, where does the game go next? Because a lot of people have talked about, to counteract the range shooting, let's add a 4-point line. It seems gimmicky, but I think a lot of people felt like the 3-point line was gimmicky at the time, so maybe that's possible. or what do you allow? Like, I know, it's been, gosh, you're talking about well over a decade now, where probably, I think, going on over 15 years, where the zone defense has been now made legal in the NBA. We've used it. Teams have used it against us. And I actually think that's a really interesting counter now, especially if you have a really rangy, long, athletic big who can step out in the high post too, but which really breaks up with so much length. You get so much length on an NBA court that if you're running a zone, this isn't Syracuse we're talking about. Like, it's really hard to break down an NBA zone defense, even with elite offensive players. So, like, that's actually been an interesting counter, I think, to all the shooting and athleticism out on the court. But, like, what's next? Where do we go, I guess, to either maybe curtail some of the shooting or, like, bring it back in? Do you change the rules, or is there some sort of defensive scheme that comes in? Like, what's next for the NBA over the next 5 years?
I mean, that's the $1 million question right there. What I think about is just who is on the floor, which is just as important as what strategies are being deployed. So when I think about what the NBA is going to look like in 5 years, I think about this probably isn't going to happen, but someday where, everybody is at least 6'6", 6'7", and taller, and everyone can handle the ball, and everyone can shoot, and everyone has skill, and everyone is able to defend all 5 positions. And that's kind of where I think it's ultimately headed, or at least where the trajectory feels like it's going. Obviously that's not, there's going to be tons of, we just talked about Trey Young, there's tons of talented players who are going to be a little bit smaller. But you just look at like the lineups that the Philadelphia 76ers are putting out there. And, they have a little difficulty on the defensive end where they don't really have anyone who can defend point guards. So like someone like Kemba Walker really gives them fits. Kyrie Irving really gives them fits. The other night, even Corey Joseph and Darren Collison, the Sixers won that game, but the Pacers point guards were giving them some trouble. But just like the size that they have is just so overwhelming at every position in their starting 5, where you have JJ Redick is the smallest guy, and he's 6'6", I think, 6'5", 6'6". So that, I think that's where it's ultimately headed, maybe. But, in terms of strategy, I don't know what you do. Or in terms of even rule changes, I don't know what you do, because the 4-point line is a little gimmicky, I think, and I don't know if that ever actually becomes a rule.
Well, and it's fascinating too, because I saw Tom Haberstroh, and Tom is just such a sharp guy. He wrote a piece last week talking about how the offensive rebound rate just climbs exponentially on deep threes. The deeper you take the three, the higher, and it gets to the point where you're taking from 28 feet out. And I'm going off the top of my head here, but I want to say the offensive rebound rate becomes like 60%. And so he had a line, it was a great line. He said, logo threes have now become BOGO threes, because if you attempt them, you're more likely to get the ball back and put up another one. So almost the math now is just so much in favor of saying, hey, if you can get these shots up, hit them with a decent regularity, you might as well put them up, because even if you miss, you're likely getting the ball back and getting another crack at it. So yeah, it's become a math game. It's taken a little while in the NBA to follow suit, I guess, of baseball and some other sports, but the NBA's become a math game.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't get. I hope it does. That was a great piece by Tom, by the way. But I hope it doesn't get to be too predictive in terms of where we're able to just apply numbers to absolutely every aspect of the game. And I don't think it ever will get there, because players are so dependent on who else is on the court, and game situations alter strategical implementation and all of that. So I hope it doesn't get like the baseball comparison scares me a tiny little bit. But it is just fascinating the way we're able to analyze the game with analytics, and it is fascinating that piece that Tom wrote about the BOGO shot, and is the value of launching from deeper and just giving yourself second opportunities. I thought was really interesting.
All right, we'll wrap with this. Kemba's had another incredible year. He just went for 40 again, 5th time last night. He did that 6th most in the NBA. He had a 40-10 game, and it was 10 rebounds. He had a 40-10-5 game, which was, I believe, the 2nd in team history. He's got the only other one of those. He leads the East in three-pointers made. He's 5th in scoring in the Eastern Conference. I mean, I'm close to it. So obviously I admit I'm biased. But I think it's between him and Beal in my mind for the final All-NBA spot. What do you make of it? Like, I think Kemba, because of the totality of work he's done it all year long, it seems like Kemba, third team All-NBA. I think that's entirely realistic by the time the season's over. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm pretty sure he has not missed a game this season.
Yep, has not missed.
Yeah. No, I mean, just the fact that, his numbers are just ridiculous. That goes without saying. And the fact that he improves every single season is very commendable. I think that, Charlotte's, if you just look at even their on-off numbers with Kemba, the fact that they've had a positive net rating for almost the entire season with Kemba on the floor, and then you look at their record and they may not make the playoffs, that's very impressive to me. And there's been a ton of injuries that the Hornets have had to deal with. It's a new coaching staff too. Just a lot of difficult things that he's had to endure. And I think, the type of player he is, the fact that his scoring numbers keep going up, even though defenses are, their number one priority every single night is to slow down Kemba Walker. I thought I watched that game last night. I thought his 40 points were, amazing. The strategy to slow him down, they would switch bigs onto him a little bit on the pick and roll, but then they started to trap him, and he's able to just kind of wiggle his way around with just like some of the niftiest ball handling in the league. So I love watching Kemba. I mean, Brad Beal's had a really good season as well. I love watching him play. But I mean, if I had to vote, I would put Kemba third team All-NBA.
Yeah, and the crazy part is there were two guys in the NBA that have scored 60 in a game this year. They were both going at it last night, James Harden and Kemba Walker. Like, that's still the craziest thing to me. All the 50 is, I forget the exact number of guys that have gone for 50 plus now this year. I want to say it's 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that range, but two have gone for 60, and it's James Harden, not surprisingly, and Kemba, who's listed at 6'1". I love Kemba. He's like 5'11". So like, still, I mean, great. How do you go for 60 points at that size? Like, that's an achievement that just goes beyond saying.
I think that was against Philly, right?
Yeah, against Philly in overtime.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, he's incredible. I mean, I thought his first few weeks of the season were just like shot out of a cannon, and he was kind of reminding me of the season that Isaiah Thomas had in Boston when he finished fifth in the MVP voting. Just in terms of how incredibly valuable he is to his team on the offensive end, and how he bends defensive game plans to his will, really. And so he's just had a tremendous season, and his future will be really interesting to watch.
All right, Michael Pina, you got to read this piece. It's really fascinating. And we got a guy similar to this here in Charlotte, Jay Hernandez, on our coaching staff that we love. That's been Kemba's skill coach since he came out of UConn. But you got to read this piece on God, Sham God, and what he's doing, and the place of skill work in the NBA and where it's going. So you go and check it out. The best way to do it, go to Michael's Twitter page. It's at Michael V. Pina, and you can see all his work there and all his previous stuff that's up there as well. And Michael, it's good to talk to you, man. It's been long overdue, and enjoy the rest of the season. Thanks for catching up.
Chris, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's another episode of Courtside Seats, our Charlotte Hornets podcast. Michael Pina making time for us, and he's written everywhere, Vice Sports. Now he's freelancing a little bit and has that great piece up at the Washington Post. So check that out on his Twitter page. It's at Michael B. Pina on Twitter. And if you've missed any of our previous episodes of Courtside Seats, you can check us out on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, wherever podcasts are available, including Apple Podcasts. Just go and you find us. You can search Courtside Seats. You can search Charlotte Hornets, Kroeger, and just subscribe, rate, and review. You'll see all the episodes there. Or you can find us at Hornets.com, on the Hornets mobile app, or even on our official YouTube channel, where we've got all great Hornets content all the time. Just search for Charlotte Hornets on YouTube, and you can subscribe there, and you'll get all sorts of that great content. Thanks for sticking around. We'll catch you guys another episode back here again next week, right here on Courtside Seats.